Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
My guest today is Tolithia Kornweibel, the CMO of Gusto, a company that, in their words, is reimagining HR, payroll, and benefits for over 60,000 companies nationwide. Whatever they are doing seems to be working, because if you look on LinkedIn, you'll see that Gusto has increased its employee count by 94% in the last 2 years and has well over 800 employees, again, at least by LinkedIn's count. So I'm excited to talk just how do you manage that kind of growth? Also because Gusto works with companies and their employees, I suspect we'll get into that topic. So Tolithia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor.
So first thing is, I loved it. I looked up on your LinkedIn profile and I noticed that you have a one name link, which, is the first time I've ever seen that. And so you have to talk about your name a little bit. I mean, how did that come into being?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a family name. It's a great-great-grandmother name. But the better story than that is that it was a bet that my mom lost to my uncle for naming rights.
What?
Yeah.
How does one sell naming rights to, this is not a stadium. This is a child.
Right. It's an interesting family, I'll tell you that much.
Okay. Well, we just learned some inside information about the relationship between your mom and her brother. Okay. So one of the things we talked about before I hit the record button is that this is your first job, CMO role, and your first in B2B, because you were at Esurance for 8 years and had other experience before that. Let's talk about what you, in the last 2 years, some of the things that you think have been the biggest sort of differences in terms of both the role as CMO and the world of B2B.
Yeah, so I was very apprehensive. It's sort of crossing the chasm in B2B marketing. And I did require some retraining, especially in vocabulary, but I think there's a lot of consistencies in the way that we think about our audience and how to reach them. So was pleasantly surprised. And I'd add to that Gusto serves small businesses, fewer than 100 employees. So it's actually a mass market within the US, 5.5 million potential customers for us. So there's aspects of our distribution and our marketing strategy that actually are very consumer-esque, which has been a nice transition for me. I was surprised by the sort of high-touch approach that we take for some of the clients that are a little bit bigger, a little bit more complex in their needs. And I was really surprised at the proportion of budget that we allocated to what I would classify as working media versus all the other expenses within marketing. That's very different in B2B than it is in B2C.
Yes, so we'll come back to all of those, but first we want to get to know you a little bit. And so let's, since we talked about this in the pre-show, what's your favorite show on Netflix right now?
It's HBO, but I'm obsessed with True Detective, and I think we bonded over the second season, having been disappointed. But I'll just make the reco to you now that the third season's really good.
Okay, it's back on the list, and I have to just do a quick plug for Russian Dolls. If you all haven't seen that one.
Already binged.
Right, it's amazing, right?
So great. It's so great.
It really is, and it's just and without even spoiling, I can say there are a lot of ways to die. Yet what you discover in this show. Okay, do you have an application right now on your phone that you think is killing it, that you just love?
Yeah, I've been trying to get on a health kick. So, MyFitnessPal has always been an app that I've liked and found really usable. I'm actually, it's interesting. I get in trouble a lot for this professionally, but I don't tweet.
Oh.
And so I have some Luddite sort of tendencies, and I would say that obsessive app usage is also one of my Luddite tendencies. I am not really on my phone as much as people of my generation tend to be.
And that's probably pretty good. That probably saves you hours and hours of time. I've said this before. My friends at Twitter will not be happy to hear it, but I'm convinced that Twitter might have died if it hadn't been for our current president. No, it does have its value, and that's going to make it a lot harder to tag you on Twitter when we tweet about the show. But we'll live with that. Okay. Have you read a book lately that's rocked your world?
There's a book I'm reading now called Dream Hoarders that is great. And then I reread one of my favorite and top recommendations for business books of all times that was recommended to me a few years ago, called The Flaw of Averages by Sam Savage, that I think is just fantastic, especially for anyone who's very metrics driven.
The Flaw of Averages. Mm-hmm. And what's the thesis of that book?
Well, he goes through a series of anecdotes where business leaders or other folks sort of made misinterpretations of data because they looked at the averages instead of sort of the distributive analysis underneath.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll add that to the reading list. Okay. What would you say is the proudest moment as a marketer for you in your career so far?
It's a great question. I think, we did some innovative stuff at Esurance, and just that entire experience was incredibly rewarding because it's a highly competitive category with sort of an arms race of advertising, and we were a challenger brand. And so we had to be better in terms of execution just to survive. And one of the most innovative things that we did was we recognized that potential customers were comparison shopping, not through their shopping journey. And so rather than trying to pretend that we could hold them captive and force them to decide to choose us, we sort of embraced that comparison shopping instinct and demand. And we actually offered options within our shopping experience for other competitors. Because ultimately we realized that if the customer was going to select other competitors, that was what was right for them. So it was a little bit scary and bold at the beginning because you're basically putting somebody else's brand in your acquisition funnel.
I want to just stop you there and embrace that. I'm hugging that idea. If you could do that on a podcast, I'm hugging it. And the reason I'm hugging it is in the B2B world, we know even with small businesses, there's more than one decision maker. They're going to do the comparison shopping. Make it easy. Brent Adamson, who's been a guest on this show several times, talks about making buying easier. That's what you did with the comparison shopping. Not to mention the trust that it says, hey, we're strong enough. We believe in our product well enough that, we'll put our competitors on here. Knock yourself out. You go do that comparison, and then we know you're going to come back. And I bet a lot of them never left the site. They just saw it and went, oh, that's helpful. Great.
Yeah. And if they did, we got a little bit of revenue out of it if they chose one of the other options. So it was kind of a win-win all around.
Oh, see, that's even smarter. It's like, well, we'll get some, wow. Okay, that's genius. So you monetize the traffic one way or another. Wow. Very cool. Have you been able to take some of that thinking over to Gusto?
Yeah. So one of the things, when I came here, I started at Gusto about 2 years ago. And one of the things that we were really struggling with was how to optimize with a sales cycle that takes a little bit longer. It's not an instantaneous decision. Certainly we don't have a year-long enterprise cycle, but it takes a few weeks to really make a final decision and move, especially because payroll is the lead product for us. And so migrating systems it can be a little bit painful for our customers. So that takes some time. And so one of the things that we really needed to be able to do was optimize our daily lead generation to eventual outcomes. And so we thought about it as a funnel, not a pipeline. And as my team is generating leads on a daily basis, they're scoring them for conversion probability and lifetime revenue. so they can make daily optimization decisions without having to wait for pipeline evaluation or eventually conversion.
There was a lot there that, and I hate this term unpack, but that's just what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to just unpack all of those things. So stay with us. Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back, and we've been talking about, we just started talking about B2B pipeline optimization, if you will, and you were talking about scoring and probability and lifetime value. And I'm curious, what tools are you using to help with that? What's your tech stack look like?
Yeah, so we have proprietary algorithms for the scoring, and I'm a big proponent of that. I think you can use lead scoring tools and partners, especially if they bring unique data into the mix. But I have never found scores to be as effective when purchased versus when developed and tooled internally, especially if you sort of have multiple channels happening. So we have a data science team that helps us with that. On the tech stack side, we have Marketo piped into Salesforce. And then we have a bunch of pretty typical, I would think, in the ecosystem around that, a bunch of other tools that sort of come and go, from analytics on our website using Amplitude. And I'm trying to think to a landing page optimization tool we're currently using called Spiralize. And Kenshu on the search side. So it's hard to even keep track.
Well, I know. And, an earlier interview I did with Megan Eisenberg, CMO of MongoDB, she mentioned that they had 28. They had 35, and then they had sunsetted 7 of them, to quote her. How many do you think you have in your stack?
I would guess we have a dozen.
Okay.
I don't
That's
think
a manageable number.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Okay. So you have a proprietary algorithm that helps you score with these things. You mentioned sort of probability and then lifetime value. How are you able to predict something like lifetime value based on the behavior that someone has? Is it just based on, you can do quickly figure out, they're from this company, and you have data that will show they have 15 people versus 100 people? I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, so some of it is pretty straightforward. So one of the key product offerings that we have is small group health insurance. And the likelihood that a company is going to be able to afford and make health insurance a priority for their team members falls across some pretty clear lines. Not 100%. That's why modeling becomes really important. But there are some clear firmographic variables that really do align with sort of our strategic value that we can bring to customers. In addition to that, there's pretty significant differences between the sources of leads coming in. And then, of course, there's behavioral scoring that, we sort of score on day one so we can optimize our lead buys. But then we continue to score as leads are nurtured and developed through the funnel. So, it's kind of we had a similar algorithm at Esurance, and it's the kind of thing where if you have a great data science team, they'll do a lot of analysis to see where some of the big chunks may reside, but then they'll do just a ton of iteration of different regressions and model development, because the truth is that all these factors interact with each other, and it's typically not as clear cut as you'd like to think it is in terms of where your highest priorities are going to fall.
And I imagine it changes over time,
Mm-hmm.
and right, and so there's a little bit of guesswork. But I'm wondering, as you've gone through this process of building your B2B funnel, has there anything happened that surprised you?
Yeah, one of the things we're kind of taking a look at now is how customers are contending with options. So Gusto used to be sort of a one product value prop with then different add-on options for our customers. About a year and a half ago, we introduced 3 tiers to our product, 3 different bundles. And so I don't think we have it fully figured out yet. Whether that should be a discussion we have with our customers, including digitally at the top of the funnel, the middle of the funnel, or the bottom of the funnel. And so I think we have work to do to figure that out. And why that was a surprise to me was just how tricky it is in B2B to figure out when the actual commit occurs, when the actual yes happens. We don't have an easy thing like a credit card entry
Right.
in the way you do in consumer. And so that's been a surprise for me at how squishy that really can be.
So we've been talking fairly tactical with demand generation and the management of that. Let's pull back a little bit and say, from a strategic standpoint or a expression of a big idea, how are you holding these tactical inbound things together? Is there a sort of unifying idea?
Absolutely. I mean, we want to be the people stack for all small businesses in the US, and we're also a full service offering. So we really got our start and got to tens of thousands of customers by having best in class payroll, but we are an integrated all-in-one. And so branding and positioning is incredibly important to us because the awareness of us overall, unaided awareness, is quite low. But where we have any, we're known for payroll. And so it's a really big deal for us to figure out how to be more than payroll, and specifically to be very intentional about what that more means and who we're for.
And so I think of payroll, and I think the 800-pound gorilla in the category is ADP, right?
Absolutely. Paychecks is a close second. And then there's a bunch of companies whose names all start with pay.
Right.
Follow on. And fun fact, we did a brand awareness survey where we invented a payroll company whose name started with pay, and they did pretty well.
Yeah, well, maybe you need to build a site for them and start that as a side business because it's already in the name. Wow,
Right.
Wow, that's impressive. But it also speaks to sort of the inaccuracy of people's memory.
Right.
Yeah, a little scary. That's interesting. So, is there? As you've come into all of this, is there something that you would say is particularly renegade in terms of the marketing that you are doing for Gusto?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this was a company that grew quickly early on because the product quality and experience blew the competitors away. And so to this day, we continue to get a ton of our growth from word of mouth. Mm-hmm. And we have an incredibly high NPS, and we're incredibly proud of that. And we are a very customer-centric company, and we love spending as much time serving and understanding our customers as possible. I think that the renegade thing maybe that I did here was there was some DNA here, or there were not super high expectations for marketing as a strategic function within the company. And a nexus for growth. And I think some of that is traditional enterprise points of view around sales-led growth strategies. And some of that is traditional product-led point of view around product quality-led growth strategies. So I've just sort of been on a mission internally to demonstrate and then educate how thinking about our customers in their natural habitat and creating the proper positioning and outreach to them is a strategic way to grow a business. It's not a go-to-market afterthought once your product is in place and your sales folks are hired.
Yeah, well, that's sort of, you described most companies that I've talked to in Silicon Valley. It's all about build a brilliant product, people will discover it and share it, and there you go. And so you're really trying to get marketing with a really serious seat of the table at the strategic table. And that presents its own challenges. And it seems that part of the challenge is, as you described it, at some point, some aspect of marketing needs to be baked into the product or the service or something so that you can sort of say, see, look, this is more than just us, grabbing the leads from the website.
Yeah, so one of the ways we've been trying to bake marketing in more is to develop rigor and skills around market research and specifically around segmentation. So I think in B2B, especially when your market is smaller, the stakes are not as high as in B2C to be competitively differentiated, sort of from a very simplistic brand perception point of view. And in order to build a differentiated identity, it's really important to understand the values, attitudes, and the drivers of your target audience. So psychographics, not just firmographics. And so I've really been trying to help the company understand from the consumer background that I have some ways that we can accelerate our growth and be more compelling all the way through the customer journey by better understanding the psychographics and how that marries to sort of the demographics, firmographics of our target customers.
And I think it's such a great point in terms of the small business audience. If you're new to that audience, you say, well, small businesses are small businesses. And there's such a range in there. When we did work with Time Warner Cable Business Class, which is now Spectrum, and the same thing when we did work with Optimum Business at Cablevision, what you learn through all the research is there's a good 40% of small businesses that aren't looking to grow.
Right.
Which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
When you think about it, because, you're in Silicon Valley, everybody is about, we're starting this company and off we go. But a lot of small businesses are dry cleaners. They're just, they're 2, 3, 4 people, and they're just trying to stay in business and make a profit and, and all those things. So segmenting just there is important. And then, depending on the industry that they're in and their growth strategy and all sorts of things, they're very different. There is no such thing as this uniform small business audience.
Right. And they have a lot to lose that is very different from enterprise shoppers. They can't afford to spend a ton of time researching different options, sampling things, or negotiating. They just don't have the time. And if they make a bad decision for their business, it can be catastrophic. So, trust is really important, and how you convince folks that you're trustworthy is consumer marketing in my mind. And how you get people to feel confidence making a decision quickly. That comes from a lot of consumer marketing background. We don't have the luxury of time you sometimes get with demos, on-site visits, analyst reports, and some of the other ways that B2B shoppers are sort of empowered to make the decisions.
Very cool. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about engaging small businesses, segmentation, and all that other good stuff. So stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and we've been talking about the recognition that there isn't a target that really is uniform. But one of the things that I'm interested in is that brands face this challenge is that we could segment small business into 30 buckets and 20 different personas, and then we could try to create content for each. And there's the risk that you could create all these different Gusto brands when all of it really, in some ways, has to come back to the same, because those small businesses are going to talk to their friends who are in small businesses. And if if you're talking to them about, well, Gusto is this company that really cares about small business, and then the other one say, well, this guy, Gusto is the most efficient place. You have some dissonance. So how are you sort of keeping track of the bigger idea of the brand and yet segmenting, and how does that sort of work play itself out in your planning process?
It's such a great question. So I have resisted verticalization for the 2 years I've been here for exactly the reason that you mentioned. And given that we're still in early stages in terms of brand awareness, I think there is a real big danger to becoming known for too many things, so known for nothing. And so far, I think we've all collectively as a leadership team aligned around having a very horizontal approach, which actually in terms of product development is pretty efficient too. If you can going back to the question of how do you make sure that your entire company's approach is integrated between product, sales, marketing, and the other functions. So if you can find a sizable population where a horizontal strategy for both your product and your brand works, that's great, and can really scale effectively. And so far, so good on that. I mean, we're still, we're 60,000 businesses, but that's only 1% of the addressable market. So we feel like we have a lot of upside. And if we can focus on that and not get distracted, build strong brand awareness for our core value proposition and the customer love that we focus on every day, then when we add in specialization, it should not dilute our awareness and our consideration.
Hear, hear. I am with you 100%, and I wish other B2B marketers sort of understood that. And the reality is, even as if your market was 10%. Now, I have talked to some folks that have done micro verticals really, really well, but we're talking about where you're dealing with, say, law, and then you're talking about pharma, and you're talking about these big enterprise plays where the knowledge of the business is so critical. I get that. But in your case, that it doesn't make sense. All right. I want to go back to, I remember reading your mission statement is to create a world where work empowers a better life. And I'm curious how that mission actually ends up translating into does that help with the product roadmap and marketing, as you just alluded to, these things working together?
It actually aligns everything we do as a company, internal and external. I would say it's also a defining concept in the way that we hire with intentionality, the way that we bring new gusties, which is our internal name for our employees,
Love it.
into our company, and how we empower them throughout their experience with us. But it also speaks to the fact that we see ourselves as facilitating a relationship between employers and their employees. And we care about both of those audiences too. And I would also say that it comes from our origin story, which is not uncommon for a tech startup, that our three co-founders believe completely and sincerely that work is fundamentally good. And that, maybe to these days, it isn't always as good as it should be for employers or for employees, but we're committed to creating a future where it is.
So how do those are wonderful words. I believe in them. How do you make that real? Either through your marketing or the product? What are some things, an example of how you make work good or empowering a better life?
I look at what we've done to engage the employees of the businesses we serve. So quite simply, we've sort of converted what's usually sort of a transactional experience between an employer and an employee to a life moment, and in our best cases, a moment of delight. So getting paid should be a celebration, not just a inhuman transaction. And last year, we introduced a new product that allowed the employees of our customers to get access to their wages on demand rather than waiting for the next payday. And so we just want to make sure that not just the obvious products are available to our customers. So we have ability for our employees who work for our customers to save for retirement, get access to health benefits, get tax advantage, commuter benefits, etc. But that we're actually innovating and thinking about how can we make this relationship between employers and employees better, and create the environment where work is adding value to their lives.
Very cool. So just to make sure I understand on demand, that means if it's not the 15th or the 30th or the last day of the month, this employee could go in on the 7th and say, hey, I need this money now. And there's some way of getting that into their account?
Exactly.
That's very cool. And that is innovative. And that speaks to, hey, things happen in one's lives. And if we as a company really care about our employees, then we can bend in order to help them. And that certainly, let's face it, that matters. All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here. I love the fact that you've taken some of the principles that you learned in B2C marketing and applying them to B2B. We talked a lot about sort of the tech stack and building out a demand engine, but we didn't forget about the higher purpose and the mission of the organization, which sometimes does get lost. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, as we wrap up and you're talking to a group of fellow, primarily B2B marketers, what are sort of 2 do's and a don't that you've learned over the last 2 years at Gusto?
Yeah, I mean, I think the do, as I said earlier, is demonstrate before educate within your organization. So if you do want marketing to have a strategic seat at the table, amp up the growth first and prove that you can do it before sort of going on that internal, I think, educational mission that we all, as marketing leaders, we're ready for. We know it's coming and we can be really good at it, but get the leads first. That's my do. The other do, I would say, is that patience and intestinal fortitude, not to react to a lot of inbound suggestions about specialization or how about this? Have we tried this? Should we do a Super Bowl ad? But really, you won't succeed if you don't follow what you know to be productive and on strategy. So just be patient and be strong. And then what would I say in terms of don't? One don't I have is, I do think that in B2B, we are very pipeline mindseted instead of funnel mindseted, and I think sometimes we rely a little too heavily on sort of qualitative assessment of how we're doing to grow the business. And so remembering to go back to quantitative measures and external measures like market research, like brand tracking, I think is a good reminder if you can. Yep. Perfect.
There's no reason, if you're not doing brand tracking, to me, it's such a fundamental thing. You're really setting yourself up for failure, particularly if there's an economic shutdown and you don't understand where your brand is. That's the time where you really are thankful that you have a brand health and brand tracking in place. So anyway, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
So, and to the listeners, as always, I'm so grateful that you spent this time with us. If you have ideas for the show, you can ping me. I'm easy to find on the web, renegade.com, renegadethinkersunite.com. Share the show with a friend. And until next week, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.